Hello, everybody. This is William del Pilar, and let's get right down to it in what I call a fired up clip. And Trump's media makeover. Real news up front, mainstream media to the back of the bus. That's right, baby. Did you know that the mainstream media is controlled by about 6 corporate behemoths? And it's shown, as we've seen over the years, especially since the turn of the century, an open hostility to all things conservatism. And that includes politicians as well as we, the people. There's a saying, he who controls the media controls the country. What that means is whoever controls the communications channels controls the narrative. And that controls us because it helps indoctrinate us or lead us astray and or flat out lie to us. So in essence, we never really know the truth. I saw this firsthand in Panama, and that is where my mother's from. That's where my formative years were created, I guess, for lack of a better word. But so let's talk about why this is important. Well, again, 6 major communications or corporations. You have AT&T, Comcast, the Walt Disney Company, News Corp, Viacom, CBS, and Sony. Now that'll change. Maybe it's already changed. But the point that you see here is that it's a handful of, again, behemoths that control about 90% of the media content in these United States. You know, I'm always telling my podcast team members, as well as our other podcasters, that approximately the top 50 podcasts in this country dominate about 85% of the market, and we're vying for the rest of the 15%. So this is not an alien formula, or this is not an outlier. This is what tends to happen at times. So this concentration has led, and as we have seen, gives us reason for concern about the diversity of viewpoints and why we currently have a bias in news reporting. So what is this bias against conservatism? It's not anecdotal. Studies and polls have consistently shown that journalists in the mainstream media lean left. And one of the study points, and this one here was done right around 2013. There are more updated ones that show, I don't know, 40% of the media leans left. Now it's much higher in the 90s because they come out of the closet as full-blown leftists. So this ideological imbalance, it does skew the news coverage, especially on politics. We see it in sports too. And it's often framing conservative policies and politicians in a negative light. I made my bones in the fantasy sports industry. I was a pioneer. I was the NFL Network's first fantasy analyst, football analyst. I was one of the first companies showcased by mainstream media. But the moment I came out as conservative, I tell you, I lost a lot of followers of my peers, people who I helped build the industry with, who I helped get jobs out there. That's what happens when you're seen as vile and evil. And they don't want anything to do with me because they're afraid. They're cowards. They truly are cowards because they're afraid of getting canceled. So what's the impact on this public perception? Well, I just told you. It shapes public opinion. These behemoths, these networks, they have shaped the opinion of making we conservatives look vile, look evil. It's the furthest from the truth. Actions speak louder than words. And look at the actions from the so-called compassionate party, the compassionate left, the tolerant left. They're not very compassionate nor tolerant. Again, he who controls the media controls the country. And that reflects the power of media in influencing political discourse, elections, and policymaking. Current media, again, is biased. And that's why they have their lowest approval ratings in history. And that steady decline sped up at the turn of the century when Al Gore failed to steal the election, as he tried to through Florida with the help of the mainstream media. The distrust in both the media and the political system, specifically Democrats that align with the media, began a slow fall that has turned into a free fall. So why is this important? Well, understanding this dynamic is crucial because it influences how public policy is debated and perceived. And it obviously affects electoral outcomes by shaping voter perceptions. Look at California. This is a lost state because our own Republican Party here refuses to fight back, but because the media and the indoctrination, the false narratives are so strong. And when you have a party that doesn't fight back, such as the California Republican Party, when I first entered the fray, was led by Fat Man Jim Brote, and then by Quarterson Jessica Milan Patterson. Not very flattering comments, I know, because they're vile people who put their own personal enrichment and power ahead of doing what was best for the constituents who the party is supposed to represent. And because of that, California went into an exponential free fall in going from red to purple to blue. Deep blue now. So this means it underscores the need for media literacy and the consumption of diverse news sources to get a fuller picture of events and issues, ergo the truth. If we have different opinions, different discourse, we're going to formulate our own thoughts and processes as long as it's coming from the fountain of truth. And it doesn't. So none of that's happening. So this lack of ideological diversity in media leads to what is called echo chambers, where only certain narratives are amplified, leftist, progressive, socialist right now. And it marginalizes our voice, the conservative voice and viewpoints. Again, we're talking to mainstream media. There's a reason podcasting, such as myself and Joe Rogan, who tries to compete with me. For those out there, I'm just kidding, because there's going to be some leftists who take it literally. My point being is the rise of podcasts, the rise of alternative media, of new media has exponentially grown because of the distrust in mainstream media. So what is this current media landscape? Well, for decades, major media outlets have demonstrated clear bias against Republican administrations. It really blew up with George W. Bush, W. And it's exponentially gone up with Donald Trump. And all it has done is, first, it would sit there and lean towards progressive democratic agendas. Now they were calling Trump Hitler, fascist. And this documented evidence of slanted coverage has significantly eroded the trust in this media, and they don't see it. It's one reason Trump had such a decisive victory. Americans are seeking more honest reporting. You don't believe me? Here's 3 of them. I don't want to spend the whole show on this because I documented 15, but here's 3 quick ones. The Russia hoax. These media outlets falsely reported, and they knew it was false. They knew it came from Hillary Clinton, but they falsely reported alleged collusion between Trump's campaign and Russia, leading to years of unsubstantiated claims that they said, or rather, that came from them, and unsubstantiated investigations that eventually or ultimately found no direct evidence of collusion. It all came from Hillary Clinton. If they had done any reporting, they could have just gone to the book Shattered, where it says it at the very end that they're going to claim it's a Russia hoax moving forward. Or that's who they were starting to blame, to create a narrative. That's one. That's probably the biggest. Then there's the Covington Catholic High School incident. Media outlets like CNN and the Washington Post purposely misrepresented an encounter between students and a Native American activist, portraying the students as the aggressors, when video evidence clearly showed the opposite. It not only led to public apologies and retractions, but lots of money going from these media conglomerates to the main student with the at Covington High. And then there is the Jussie Smollett case. Jussie Smollett. Media outlets were all over him, giving him carte blanche in terms of, look at all this racism, at 2 a.m. in Chicago, in one of the deepest blue cities in America, Chicago. You're going to find Make America Great Again trolls walking the streets of Chicago at 2 a.m. I mean, just a setup was a complete lie. And they purposely reported it, even after they found out. To remind you, Jussie Smollett claimed of being attacked by Trump supporters without any skepticism coming from the media. In fact, VP Kamala Harris or as I call her, horizontal Harris. She was all over it. There's tweets there showing her condemning Donald Trump and white supremacy, which we all condemn white supremacy, but we don't condemn Donald Trump because he's not a white supremacist. Eventually, as we all now know, he staged the incident. The two white guys were two Nigerian brothers, literally brothers. And there was no acknowledgement or little acknowledgement and no apology from the media for getting it wrong. So those are just three of the big ones. Some recent examples this past election cycle that y'all probably know most of these, but for my newer audience members who may not, or for some of my older members who my parents have said, got to listen to my son's podcast. I'm kidding. I mean, I'm hoping that's true, but just to newer members who or people who may not be aware or need reminding. CBS doctoring the 60 Minutes promo of their interview with Kamala Harris. They were caught editing that promo to make her appear more articulate by stitching together different parts of her responses. They wanted to make her sound smarter. She sounded so unsure. That too. Well, with Israel, we are looking at it from this perspective. They needed to show her sharp because she comes across as dumb, which she actually is, despite being a lawyer. Kind of like an oxymoron there, because you may hate lawyers, but they tend to be on the intelligence scale, but not her. Obviously, she took her a few times to pass the bar. But anyway, moving on. CBS suppressing Catherine Hedridge's reporting. CBS News prevented investigative journalist Catherine Hedridge from covering Hunter Biden laptop story. She had information. She had what was in there. They said, no, we're not interested in that. And it later proved to be legitimate. Not to mention when the N-word being dropped over a dozen times, she thought, hey, we're the party who hates racism. We're the party who fights against racism. Let's report on this. It's a big story. Our audience isn't going to be interested in that, Catherine. Why? Because it shatters the narrative and exposes the actual truth. Democrats do a lot of projecting. Then there were emails from Biden or referencing Biden in some form or manner that she discovered. Nix, can't have that, can't have that. What happened? The media went along for the ride that the Hunter Biden laptop story was a fraud, was Russian misinformation. Turned out to be true. MSNBC's Hitler and fascist accusations of Donald Trump. They just repeatedly, over and over, The View also, they just likened Trump to Hitler, labeled him a fascist, and despite his presidential record showing no such authoritarian tendencies, thereby inflaming political discourse with no proof, no basis, no nothing. They actually twisted his words around. And the Charlottesville, let's not even get into that. That was a complete lie. That even the leftist-leaning factual information service Snopes, which you can't believe 90% of the time, even they came out and said, nah, he never said that. Then there's ABC assisting Kamala Harris in a debate during the we all saw that. They were helping her out by fact-checking Trump and letting every lie she said go unchecked. And the fact-checking they did on Trump wasn't really fact-checking as much as they were making their own lying accusations of what wasn't fact as fact. CBS helping Tim Walter in the VP debate. J.D. Vance had to go there and correct him. When he corrected them, they wanted to move along and were kind of like denigrating towards him. They scrutinized his comments more harshly. Then there were all the network media softball interviews with Kamala Harris. Oh, the one on Stephen Colbert was the worst. That was across various networks. Interviews with Kamala Harris have often been characterized by a lack of tough, probing questions, suggesting an intent to protect her rather than challenge her. So what's the motive behind Trump wanting to do a shakeup of the White House press corps? Well, the aim is to introduce a more balanced representation of media in the White House briefing room, recognizing the shift in public trust towards independent news services that prioritize factual reporting over narrative-driven journalism. This actually reflects a reality that traditional media has lost its credibility and viewership. necessitating a change to include voices that resonate with a large segment of we, the American public, or we, the American people. Sure, it'll be a lot of conservative news outlets that will bring balance in the news media overall, because right now there are no unbiased and those that simply report the news. Nobody wants that, it seems. So the potential hope for we conservatives, for we the citizen, is that traditional media realizes their error, goes back to unbiased reporting, or a new outlet props up that is unbiased. And all that, what I just said, that's likely a pipe dream. We live in a National Enquirer-esque media age, shock jockish, the more spectacular the headline, the storyline, the more we'll tune in versus just straight out news. Now, some specific figures the left have mentioned is one, Joe Rogan. They use him as an example to highlight how unconventional this policy change could be, how ludicrous it could be, and they do it to demagogue what Trump wants to do, because we all know Joe Rogan is not a news reporter, is not a news service, there's no investigative reporter. He's just a popular podcaster. So this type of reporting, those reporting that, it's just another example of biased reporting to create a false narrative. Oh, look who he wants here. He doesn't even really want real news people. I mean, there are more realistic independent news media organizations. The Daily Wire, over 40 million followers and subscribers when you combine the Daily Wire and the key contributors such as Shapiro, Walsh, Knowles, Klavan. There's One America News, nearly 3 million. The Blaze, nearly 7 million. In terms of, this isn't the reach, just the people they have direct access to. Their reach is exponentially is much larger than this. Newsmax, that's a new one. It's 2020 is when they started to grow. Nearly 2.5 million. Again, this is just who they currently have access to. Their reach will be much greater with the press house room access. I mean, there's formulas, and you see in social media, you may have X amount of followers, but when you post something, here's the potential reach. It's no different than in any other industry. The Epoch Times, which is arguably as close to unbiased as you can get in how it reports it. No slant. It leans conservative with the storylines, but it is unbiased reporting. They stick to nothing but facts and the truth. So I say conservative. I view them as actually unbiased. Because there's stories there I don't care for, and they'll report on it. And they do television, they do science, politics, they do it all. Then you could even have PragerU. PragerU speaks all truth. It's tough to attack some of these outlets when they speak the truth. They're attacked because they're conservative in nature, which is what all of America was in its heyday, its glory years. When blacks were part of the Republican Party, their working wages were starting to go up. They had a nuclear family. Things were looking good. Then the great change of Democrats co-opting them with the greatest marketing plan ever devised in the history of this country. And to Black America, para mi Latinos, to Latinos out there, where's that gotten you since the 1960s? Look at your unemployment. Look at your living conditions. Look at every metric that shows economic wealth, gains in the job force. They're all down. Why? Because you have followed, and that includes me, my people, Latinos, the Democrat plantation mentality. If you got the news as it actually should be, y'all would be Republicans like that. Because all we care about is helping one another be self-sufficient or self-sustaining. That's saying, I'm going to teach you how to fish so you can learn how to fish on your own, and you don't have to take my fish. So what's the impact on mainstream media? Well, this could mark a pivotal moment where traditional media is compelled to reassess its approach. Unlikely, but we hope so. Because as their influence wanes in favor of sources perceived as more honest and less biased. Sir, I'm trying to think what the right answer is. As their influence wanes in favor of sources perceived as more honest and less biased, maybe they'll wake the bleep up is what I'm trying to say. Now, there are challenges to what Donald Trump wants to do in the press room, in the White House press corps room. There's political and legal hurdles. Implementing such changes would not only be legally challenged due to First Amendment protections, but also politically contentious. Any move perceived as favoritism or exclusion based on political views could lead to significant pushbacks and legal challenges. Again, the First Amendment, specifically speaking, well, they're saying Trump wants to alter the media access in the briefing room, which is true. He wants a more balanced press media room. But the left, the progressive, the mainstream media is going to sit there and say, hey, this affects our First Amendment right. And they have a point. Not their point, but the point of how media is supposed to be represented. Because courts have established that government created forums for press briefings must not discriminate based on journalistic content or political alignment. And that comes from Sherrill versus Knight. Now, the key issue is must not discriminate. Trump doesn't have to discriminate against leftists. He wants to bring in conservatives. So what's the conservative media? So overall, though, the court's role in ensuring this fair access, they have no right to dictate who qualifies as a legitimate media. Trump does. What they have said is they will ensure that government actions do not infringe on press freedoms. They would assess if White House access policies are content neutral and fairly applied, safeguarding the principle that a free press acts as a democratic check on government power. Right now, it doesn't. And there's enough data to prove that. The problem is activist courts. Thus, this can go up to the Supreme Court would be great. And Trump should start this now. That way the Supreme Court would hear it before he leaves office, and it's a conservative court. The reality of this, in terms of what the left is going to try to portray, again, is that you have an inclusion of more conservative and independent media. You move them up to the front, that's not an infringement of the First Amendment. This would diversify the media voices without fundamentally changing the established media landscape. And that's what we want. So what was the reactions and what are the implications to this? Well, so there's a perception of partisanship versus correction. While critics might argue this change promotes partisanship, conservatives see it as a necessary correction to an imbalanced media environment. Our aim is to ensure that all viewpoints are heard, not just the liberal slant. Trump has consistently challenged the media bias, from revoking press passes to confronting journalists on their coverage. This just reflects a broader pushback against media narratives. And let's be real, this isn't Trump doing it as much as Trump's reaction to the false narratives and outright lies perpetrated by this mainstream media in the press room, as we saw in his first term as president. What's the public and political reaction? Well, among conservatives, we finally have hope that this will lead to a more transparent media landscape, while liberals are going to view it as an attack on traditional journalism. Look at your ratings. People aren't attacking it as much as they're fleeing it. The public's growing skepticism of mainstream media will likely welcome this change. So we hope that this will or could establish a precedent for future administrations to consider when setting the tone for media access. It'll never come from the left, from a Democrat, but for Republicans, take what Trump is doing and understand what he's trying to do to get better coverage. Instead, y'all have no cojones. It's like, my God, they talk about Hollywood, how all these politicians are always cheating. Republican wives are probably sleeping around because they're not married to real men, because our Republican Party politician lack cojones. Hell, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Nancy Mace, and other women in the House of Representatives have bigger cojones than most of the men in both houses of Congress. So Trump's proposal to reshuffle the White House press corps by including more conservative and independent media voices, that's seen by us, by we the people, as a response to years of bias and misinformation from these leftist media outlets. We see this as a good thing. And we know this will lead to more balanced representation of media perspectives. It does face significant legal and political hurdles. They're going to throw the First Amendment at it. I just told you how it can easily be countered. So whether this initiative results in substantive changes, at least he's fighting. And it underscores the ongoing debate over this current media bias with their false narratives and outright lies, and should make us question the role of journalism in informing public discourse. And there you have it, my friends. I am William del Pilar. This is Fired Up. Do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to Grumblings Media. And until next time, I bid you adieu.
Hey everybody, this is Big John from Grumblings Media, and I just want to say thank you for watching our content. If you want to support our efforts here at Grumblings Media, just smash the subscribe button right here, totally free, or just go ahead and consume more of our great content. Click either one of these two boxes.